All right, good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. It is 10 o'clock, so I will go ahead and get us started. Welcome to this October 22nd Saturday session. Just a few reminders as we get started to just be mindful of your mic. So make sure you're muted and unmuted as you want to be. We do hope that everyone can have their videos on today. We understand that some of you may live in more rural places, so you may not have really great internet, and that's fine. So if you can't have it, but we do ask that you try to at least have it on while you're speaking. But if your internet's okay, then go ahead and keep that on. This is also a recorded session, so just remember that this session is recorded and then it's posted in our SharePoint here the next week or so. And just as a reminder, take breaks as needed. So if you need to refill a coffee, use the restroom, let out a dog, whatever you need to do, go ahead and do that. Just make sure you mute yourself, you turn off your camera, and just let us know. Just a quick BRB in the chat will be just fine. Just as a reminder about how to navigate Teams, some of the more important buttons, of course, this is your camera button here. So if you need to turn your camera off or on, it looks like this. This is your mic. So this is how you're going to mute and unmute yourself. A couple of more fun features. Here's people. So if you're like, hey, I wonder if my friend Shannon is here. So you can click this button and you can see who else here. This is the chat button. So if you want to type something in the chat, right here is how you do that. Reaction. So if you want to give a thumbs up or a high five, this is how you can do that. Those are the most important things. And if you have to leave, if you need to leave, there's that button. That's how you do it. Just a quick review of our team norms. To just remember to participate respectfully, to welcome multiple viewpoints, devote your attention to those speaking and sharing. We know that it is Saturday morning and there are lots of other places that you could be, things you could be doing, but we just ask, as I always say, be there or be here. If there's somewhere else you just absolutely positively have to be and you can't focus and you can't be here, then that's fine. Just let us know that you can't be here for whatever reason. We will be talking about some attendance things today too. Ask questions for clarification. So we are diving into to finances and data today. So I anticipate there's going to be some questions. Don't hesitate to ask. You can either drop those in the chat or just raise your hand and we'll make sure that we get to those. Be courageous and speak your truth. But on the back end of that is to own your intentions, right? So own your intentions and the impact that your truth might have. And of course, just honor our time together. A reminder of how to stay connected. We do have the Kentucky Leads SharePoint site, which everyone can get to, everyone on the team. There is a directory, so if you want to reach out to someone in a different district, maybe they had a good thought, a good idea, here's where you can go and find them. And we also have our discussion board, and so just as a reminder to be posting and posing and answering questions on our discussion board. Just in case you missed it, last month, September, we went over risk-focused monitoring. Carol Ann led us through some great questions and some good information around risk focused monitoring. And there is a link to that session in SharePoint. Here's a quick review of our agenda for the day. We'll do check-ins, we'll have a few updates, and then we're going to hear from Amy around data quality. We'll take a break. We're going to hear from Chris around money matters. We'll have small group discussion time and some group sharing time. And of course, we'll have our evaluation and our wrap-up. We have a couple of updates from Mike. Mike, go ahead and lead us through those updates.
Thank you, Shasta. We touched on briefly about the discussion boards. We try to mention that every Saturday when we get together. Please participate in the discussion boards post. That's important to our evaluation. Next, I want to take a couple minutes to talk about the group norms and responsibilities, and that's the document that is up on screen right now. It's also in our resource document folder in the SharePoint site. So I want to walk through. There are a couple changes and updates to that. The first one are the group norms. Shasta just covered those really well, so I'm not going to get into those anymore. And I'm going to scroll down just a little bit to the next section, Shasta. And there we go. Perfect. And I want to cover those briefly here. The first one here, first bullet point, talks about being enrolled. Obviously, we need everyone to be enrolled in one of our IHE, one of our university partners, Murray, Moorhead, or Western. So we ask that should already be taken care of. If for some reason you're not, please reach out to us. Let us know and we'll schedule some time to talk with you about that. Next item is about Saturday sessions. We have 24 of those for each cohort group over a 2-year period. We need you to participate in those. That's already been conveyed before, but we just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. And then the next piece here is a bit of an update, and it's been underlined here in the document. First talks about attendance, and we have you're allowed 3 absences during a 12-month cycle or a year cycle. We know things happen, life comes up, et cetera, et cetera. What we are asking you to do, though, moving forward, is at the bottom of this page, there's a form. We're asking everyone to, if you've missed one of the Saturday sessions, to just watch the video. We put a lot of time in bringing expert speakers. The material we cover is important for you to be successful in your role. So we ask you to just go back and take a look at that video. And at the bottom of this document, we have some guiding questions, and we're just calling it the Saturday Seminar Review Form. And you can just scroll down at the bottom of the page there and see what those questions are. Basically, it's just a reflection document. We don't have a specific length on it. We just basically want you to make sure you come back, take a look at the video, and learn from what's been presented. That's the main update there. Obviously, some of the ongoing things, we want you to complete your assignments, share information that you gained through the academy with other colleagues within your school district. We also ask you to continue to participate fully and be prepared to participate fully here in the Saturday sessions. And to pay attention and try to find mentors and be a mentor in your school district. As future leaders, you're going to be mentoring young special ed teachers, young colleagues. And so we want you to kind of get in that habit of becoming a mentor and thinking about being a mentor. And last but not least, also remember when we ask you to take the surveys for us, evaluation feedback pieces, please continue to do that. That is a very important piece that allows us to continue our funding. Our funding is not guaranteed every year unless we fully participate or fully, if we fully comply with the requirements of the grant. And so your participation helps us comply with those requirements so we can secure our funding moving forward. And then on the technical assistance side, we're always here to help you all. Reach out to us if you have questions. Everybody does. We get a lot of emails and speak with a number of different people. So you'll do a good job of that. But I just want you to remember we do provide support directly or indirectly based on the needs. And at the very bottom of the page, you'll see that Saturday Seminar Review Form. And all it is just the structure of what we need, the date of the form, your name, title of the Saturday seminar, and then we just got some guiding questions we'd just like you to reply to. You can send that to me or any one of the team members. Thank you so much, Shasta.
All right, thank you, Mike. Does anybody have any questions about the information that Mike just went over?
Aisha?
So at the bottom of that form, is that going to be put into the chat every week, or we have to find that form and fill it out and send it to you every week?
Do you mean the Saturday Seminar Review Form?
Yes.
That is only to be filled out if you missed a session.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions?
Carmen has a question. It's a related question in the chat. Oh, answered. Good. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? I've got 2 screens going on here. I don't think I see anything. All righty, great. And of course, oh yeah, go ahead.
In the SharePoint site, I haven't seen any like discussion questions that are posted to the group. There's just, all I've seen is like, you know, are you interested in a study group, or is this a problem? Is that what you guys are referring to as far as participating in questions, or is there something that I'm missing on SharePoint?
So I think, let me grab this screen here really quickly. I think you're talking about the discussion board, right? Is that what you're talking about? I think it's called Reflect and Respond in SharePoint. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, it just seems like there wouldn't be something that we would all have to respond to. So maybe I'm missing something on there.
Yeah, so usually it's scholar generated questions, thoughts, ideas, and it could be something as simple as, hey, I just found this really great resource, for, new teachers, and you could just post that and you could share that there. Or, hey, I heard this really great, idea from whatever. I'm just going to share that here. Or it could be posing a question, and you could just say question to scholars, right? And it could just be, how are you guys managing this, or how is this, happening in your districts? So it's not really formal, it's very just whatever questions you guys have, whatever thoughts you guys have, it's just a place for you guys to collaborate and come together. Sometimes, Kentucky leaders will put some things in there as well. So does that answer your question, or my leadership team, do you guys have anything else to add to that?
I think you described it pretty well. It's just an informal place to continue the conversation where you guys are leading it more than we are, right? So you can share what's going on in your district. You can post problems of practice. You can just give advice and get advice from others. It's our social media. It's our social media center there. So yeah, I sent the link in the chat to the Reflect and Respond discussion board. And I'll also share on that note, I'll go ahead and share the link to the general audience, general resources. That's where you can find some of the resources for today that Chris and Amy are going to discuss. And I'll hand it back over to you, Shasta.
All righty. Those are great questions. And like Mike said, you guys are always welcome. If something feels unclear or, confusing or whatever, you're welcome to reach out to us, any of us, via email or give us a call, either way, whatever you guys need to do as well. Righty. There are no further questions. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Amy Patterson. She is she's our data girl. Like anytime that I have questions about it, I'm like, hey, Amy. And unfortunately for Amy, everyone does that. Hey, Amy. But she is our data guru, Part B data manager, and she works with us here in the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. So Amy, I'll let you go ahead and grab the screen.
Good morning, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen here. Are you seeing my presentation of data quality?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yes, I'm going to talk to you about data quality today. I'm going to give you just an overview. This is a lot. Please feel free to ask questions and realize that it is a lot, and it took me years to fully grasp all of it. And it takes most directors of special ed a couple of years to really get their brains wrapped around all of this. It's a lot. So I'm just telling you that, so don't freak out if if you're struggling to keep up. But please ask questions. Okay. So this is Amy. It's not really what I look like, but it's close. Amy loves data. Amy collects data from all over the state. Why does Amy care about the data? Well, this is you. You work with students with disabilities. Why should you care about the data? And that's the big question. So a lot of times we think about data use, the first thing we think about is federal reporting. And yes, that is huge. That's how we get our money. Or that lets us keep our money, I guess I should say. We think about federal reporting. We think about public reporting. We think about reports to the Legislative Research Committee. We think about state reporting, things like school report card. And then maybe we'll think about district and school decisions. We look at it as a whole and think, okay, so we're struggling in math for students with disabilities. So what can we do? But then really, maybe we should be thinking about looking at it as an ARC decision when we're looking at individual students. But really, this is how it should be. ARC decisions, the individual students are the most important. IEP stands for Individual Education Program. That's what IDEA is all about, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So we need to think about individual students. If we do that, that's how change is really going to happen when we start getting down to the student level. But then these other things are important. District and school decisions. Are these decisions we're making for individual students actually working for the district and the school? And then let's look at our state reporting. Is it getting better? And then we still have to do all these other items. You know, reports go out to the Legislative Research Committee. They go out for public reporting. They go out for federal reporting. And Office of Special Education Programs, U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs takes a look at the federal reporting. It says, how's Kentucky doing? But again, it all starts with looking at each kid. Excuse me. So let's take a look at reporting. What kind of reporting is required for directors of special education? And we have directors of special education with all areas, all different layers of understanding of data. So, you know, this, again, these are things that are required by each district. And I'm just going to kind of talk through this. But again, if you have questions, please stop me. So there are two main categories of reporting that I do. And so my job is to collect data from each district in the state and then report that data to the federal government. So we have IDEA Section 618 data, and then we have IDEA Section 616 data, which is the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report, also known as the SDPAPR. You may or may not have heard of that. So the 618 data collection includes child count, education environment, which is like setting or LRE, exiting for students ages 14 to 21 who exit special education. Where do they go? And why do they exit? Discipline. This is collected through the Safe Schools Report and Infinite Campus. Personnel. So students who are adults who are working with students with disabilities. Assessment data. Maintenance of effort and comprehensive early intervening services. And I'm thinking Chris may be talking about that later, maybe. And dispute resolution. So for the 616 data collection, the first item and what most directors of special ed focus on is the child count and educational environment. So this is students, we break it up into students with disabilities, school age, and this includes kindergartners who are 5 years old, and then all students who are ages 6 through 21. And then there is children with disabilities early childhood, and those are students in preschool, so ages 3 through 5 in preschool, not in kindergarten. And then we collect a snapshot of the count of all students in the state with IEPs enrolled in a district on December 1. So it's just a snapshot of that one day. So what do we use that for? We use it, that's the official count for that school year. So everything we do for the entire school year is based on our December 1 child count, because that is the most accurate. That's the one where districts really make sure that all IEPs are in place. Everything is there, it's locked, everything, all students are enrolled where they should be, and we know those kids are where they're supposed to be. And this is also used in many other calculations. It's used in indicators 5 and 6, indicators 9 and 10, which are part of the SPPAPR, and it's included in requirements for comprehensive coordinated early intervening services, which is based on significant disproportionality. Are we removing students of one, or I'm sorry, maybe identifying students in a specific category, or just identifying them for students with disabilities, but are we doing it disproportionately based on race? So this is what our child count has looked like since 2012 to current. I have it all the way back to, I believe, 1997, but it wouldn't fit on the screen. So we're getting ready to do another child count. We're gearing up for that now. But you can see the patterns that have occurred over the years. So if you look at the total numbers, we started out in 2012 with 97,554. We got all the way up to December 2019 at 108,605, and now we're down to 104,938 in December 2021. So what do we think happened there? Why do we think the numbers went up and then back down? COVID, yep. Autism drastically increased. Yep, those are all accurate. Pandemic effect, the difference in EBD is big. Yes, it is. That has definitely gone up. Autism has gone up. Yeah, the data are really interesting to look at. And these are things that we kind of dive into periodically and just say, okay, so what kind of changes have been made and why do we think that's the case? Actually, EBD went down, didn't it? It went up from 97 to 2012 and then down. So yeah, I mean, I think COVID has definitely made a difference in our world, and I think we're going to be feeling that for a while in special education. Okay, so IDEA December 1 child count. So this is, I just want to kind of talk about this because this is kind of the most important count we do all year. This is the only one that has to be certified by our associate commissioner, and it's used in a lot of our data. So this is the regulation that requires it. And then we use this data. These are the reports that we do. Determinations, we issue district determinations every year, and I'll talk about that later. And a lot of the data comes from child count. We use it for, and this is why districts are most interested in it, seek exceptional child add-on funding. So there is a dollar amount. I think Chris is probably going to talk about the funding, but there is a base amount that all districts get. But then there is an amount tied to each child as well, an additional amount. And then we use this data to make decisions all year long. Personnel data. So we collect, and this is not collected in Infinite Campus. This is outside of Infinite Campus, but we collect this data for special education teachers, related services personnel, and paraprofessionals. And this is something that the directors of special ed are required to enter annually into a system we call GMAP. And we submit this to the federal government as well. And we collect it by certified or not certified, qualified or not qualified. Exiting is something, this is collected in Infinite Campus. It's for students ages 14 to 21 with IEPs who exited special education. And they could have exited for a lot of different reasons. They could have graduated. They could have received an alternate high school diploma. They could have just moved. They could have dropped out. They could have, I'm trying to think the other reasons, reached the age of 21 and had an alternate diploma. So we call that aged out. And we use this data to calculate graduation and dropout rates. So for the district. So this data is also pretty important. I think people overlook it a lot until they go and look at their education, their graduation and dropout rates, and then they're like, oh wait, I should have thought about this before. So section 618, data for discipline. Now this is one that the directors of special education don't really have any control over who gets removed, how they get removed, how long they get removed from the classroom for disciplinary purposes. But the director of special education is the one that has the accountability for it. So this is one that you have to, that as a director, you need to keep an eye on and pay attention to throughout the school year. And so the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support actually own this data. And they look at events. They look at the types of behaviors that have caused disciplinary removals or any other kind of action. Was it drugs? Was it bullying? Was it a weapon? All those sorts of things. Those are what they look at. IDEA looks at removals. So how long were they removed from the classroom? If they were removed from the classroom for more than 10 days, there's a whole different special set of circumstances that we have to look at. So we look at suspensions and expulsions. We also actually look at suspensions and expulsions for all students. I didn't mean to do that. And then there's interim alternative educational setting, which is a whole presentation on its own. So I'm not going to spend time with that. But in short, basically, school personnel have the ability to remove students in an emergency situation due to drugs, weapons, or serious bodily injury for up to 45 days outside of the ARC, like outside of an ARC decision. But then they're only allowed to be removed for 45 days, and the ARC has to meet to determine how and where those services will be received. So that's the 618 data. And this
Amy,
is, yeah.
Sorry, Amy, really quickly, there was a couple of questions about graduation. Would you like me to give those to you now, or do you prefer to wait till questions time?
No, now it's perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So Martha asked, how does a student on alternate assessment factor into graduation rates?
So they do not count as a graduate. They also don't count as a dropout, if that makes sense. So we calculate the graduation rate, and a graduate with a regular diploma would be in the numerator as a graduate and in the denominator of all students. A student with an alternate diploma would not be in the numerator, but they would be in the denominator. But they don't count as a dropout either. So if we're calculating the dropout rate, they wouldn't be in the numerator as a dropout. And you want your dropout rate to be lower. So they wouldn't be counted as a dropout, but they would still be in the denominator as well. Does that make sense?
And I think Chris kind of added to that. I know he's kind of like answering some of the questions for us in the chat too. And he said a graduate in the exiting report is only a student who receives a standard high school diploma.
Yes.
Okay. And then I think there was one other question. How does early graduation impact this data, and is it viewed as a negative?
Oh, that student would still be counted as a graduate. Okay, so there are two graduation calculations. There's the one that the Office of Assessment and Accountability uses, and that's the 4-year or actually 4 and 5 year cohort rate, I think is what they use. And so that's if the student enters as a freshman and then graduates as a senior, they're counted as a graduate in the 4-year cohort rate. I don't think that's viewed as a negative even for them. I think they just change cohorts. For us, we don't use a cohort rate anymore. And so they are just counted as a graduate, just like any other student graduating with a regular high school diploma. So, yep.
Great,
That's a
thank
good
you,
thing.
Amy. Yep, that's
You're
got us caught up, and just as the timestamp, it is 10:30. So, and we have until 11. So, just as a timestamp.
Sort of a general calendar of when items are due. So we always collect child count data the Monday after December 1st. Personnel data is collected in GMAP, and I don't know if Chris is going to talk about that or not, but that's where districts submit their application for IDEA funding. Safe Schools report, and these, so the December 1 child count, Safe Schools report, and exiting report are all pulled out of Infinite Campus individually. And basically, I send out a survey, and the director of special ed signs off on it saying, yeah, I've reviewed that, and I've made sure that it's accurate. And then indicators 11, 12, and 13, that's a spreadsheet I send out every year. We're looking at maybe changing that up and it not being a spreadsheet, but we'll see how that goes. So it's a spreadsheet I send out every year. Districts fill it out and then upload it to a secure site, and I pull it out and do the calculations. Okay, already talked about this, have we? Okay, so these are the data collections for 618, and then here's section 616. So this is the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report. So the federal government requires that each state develop a state performance plan every 6 years. And then the annual performance report is a report that we submit every year. And in the state performance plan, there are 17 indicators that the states are required to create targets for, annual targets for. And those include graduation, dropout, assessment. There are lots of them, and I'm going to talk about them in a minute. And so the annual performance report is how have we done toward those targets? What is our progress toward those targets each year? So these are the indicators. So we have graduation, indicator 1. Indicator 2 is dropout. We just talked about those. That comes from exiting. Indicator 3 is assessment. This has changed a little in the last couple of years. We look at participation data for all students with IEPs. And then we look at proficiency rate for students with IEPs against grade level academic achievement standards. So that's kind of, we refer to as the regular assessment. And then indicator 3C is those against alternate academic achievement standards, which is the alternate assessment. And indicator 3D is the gap between all students, the proficiency rate for all students against on the regular assessment versus, I'm sorry, all students with IEPs on the regular assessment versus all students on the regular assessment. So what's the gap there? Indicator 4 is suspension and expulsion. So for these, we look at 4A is just students with disabilities and were they removed from the classroom for disciplinary purposes greater than 10 days out of school. And then 4B is we actually look at it by race and ethnicity. So were Hispanic students removed from the classroom greater than 10 days out of school compared to the state rate? So this is a comparison to what we're doing for the state for students with disabilities. Indicator 5 is educational environments. That's LRE, were they in the classroom greater than 80% of the day? In the general ed classroom greater than 80% of the day? Were they in the general ed classroom less than 40% of the day? We look at separate schools, residential facilities, those sorts of things. Preschool environments, indicator 6 is basically the same thing. We look at where they're receiving their services. Indicator 7 is preschool outcomes, and we're in the process of changing that up right now, and it's been an adventure. Indicator 8 is parent involvement. So we survey all parents who have students with IEPs and ask them, did they feel that their school involved them in the decision-making process? Indicator 9 is disproportionate representation. So are we disproportionately identifying students with as students with disabilities in one race greater than all others? So we compare Black to non-Black, white to non-white, Hispanic to non-Hispanic, those sorts of things. And then indicator 10 is just like indicator 9, except we look at certain disability categories. The ones with asterisks here, indicator 4B, indicator 9, indicator 10, these are considered compliance indicators by the Office of Special Education Programs. And so those have to be either 0% or 100%, depending on how you're looking at it. So this needs to be, so 4B, we need to have no district suspending students by race and ethnicity at a rate of 2 to 3 times or more all other students, the state rate. Indicator 9, they need to not be, we need to have no district identifying students as students with disabilities by a certain race at a rate of 3 times or more all other students. That's 2 times or more. Indicator 11, child find. This is, and again, this is a compliance indicator, so we have to be at 100% for that. We have to be looking at 100% of students who are referred for special education have to have an eligibility determination within 60 school days. That's what child find is. Indicator 12 is early childhood transition. So, and again, compliance indicator. So 100% of students who turn 3 years old and are eligible for special education have to have IEPs by their 3rd birthday. Indicator 13, secondary transition. There's a list of items that have to be done for students ages 16 or older to prepare them to leave high school. Indicator 14 is post-school outcomes. So we call that the yo-yo survey, youth 1 year out. And we survey students who have left high school with IEPs, students with IEPs who have left high school, and find out what they're doing now. Are they in college? Are they working? Are they in some sort of training program? So that's what we look at there. And indicator 15 and 16, these are actually state indicators. Districts are not held accountable for these, but it's resolution sessions and mediation sessions. And then there's indicator 17, which is the state systemic improvement plan. And that is, each state has a different sort of topic for that, I guess. They call it the SEMR state, I don't remember what it's called, measurable results. You're looking at, Kentucky looks at 8th grade math. So we're looking at programs to help students from 3rd grade through 8th grade to improve math scores. Okay, what does it look like if you get a consent for evaluation, for a student complete the evaluation within, okay. Thank you, Chris. State identified measurable results. That's for state SSTEP. Okay. Complete the evaluation within 60 days, and when the ARC comes back together, they want more testing done. So that is a really good question, and that is a question that would need to go to our Indicator 11. Our Indicator 11 lead, and so I'm going to put my email in the chat, and if you could email me that question. I mean, there are logical reasons that you can't meet that 60-day timeline. So that's one that I'm going to have to ask the Indicator 11 lead about. So if you could email me that question, that would be helpful. Every year, the USAID releases their determinations annually, rating states on their performance. So we get what's called the state determinations, and I'm proud to say we've been meets for what, like 13 years, Chris? Is that right? 13 years straight or something? I don't know. Yeah. Okay. But likewise, we have to do the same for districts. So we issue LEA determinations, LEA, local education agencies or districts. So we report that annually. And a lot of that comes from the previous indicators that we've looked at here. Graduation, dropout, assessment. I'm trying to think which ones we use. We use graduation and dropout. I think we use 8th grade math assessment. I think we used the compliance indicators. So 4B, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So those all go into determinations. And then districts are determined if they met, if they need assistance, or if they need intervention, or need substantial intervention. Okay, so are there any additional questions? I kind of went through that pretty quickly, but I'm hoping you guys have questions for me.
And scholars, feel free to unmute yourselves and just have an informal conversation.
While you guys are
There is a
formulating,
question. Go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah.
Just going to say, while you guys are formulating some of your questions, somebody did ask about accessing the notes or the chat after the meeting. Becca, am I correct that they can go back to the chat even after the meeting is done?
It depends on how they joined and when they
Oh.
joined. Yeah.
Okay. Then let us think on that. That's a really good thought. You know, I know I've been dropping resources in here, and Amy, I dropped the APR indicator guide and link to our APR page. And so that's a really good thought. Becca and I will brainstorm on ways to make sure that you guys have access to the resources afterwards. Maybe it could just be sending out an email or something. We will talk about that and make sure that you guys have access to that afterwards.
Oh, Shasta, I always put the resources into the Kentucky Leads SharePoint site on that home page, and it's always under the header of the name of our topic, so they'll be there.
This is why we need you, Becca. That is great. Thank you so much.
With regards to the chat, Shasta, I think that for those of us at KDE that are on the same network that we maintain the entire chat, you can copy that chat and paste it into a Word document and then post it.
Perfect.
I've got a quick question.
One of the questions too that was asked was about the chat that's out there right now and being able to access that, which is why I made that comment. And I see Mike has his hand up, and I have over talked him twice.
No
Go ahead,
worries,
Mike.
Chris. Hey, Amy, quick question for you. So you talked a lot about data and data collections for the reporting process. Could you talk to us about what that data collection would look like if you work in a small district compared to like a large district as a dose? Is the dose collecting the data? Do they have data assistants? It's a lot of information to collect. Who does that? How does that work? Or can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I can say it looks different in every district. And I mentioned at the beginning, there are some doses that have a really good grasp on data and on Infinite Campus. There are some who have assistants that do it. I can tell you in a large district like Jefferson County or Fayette County, they have a whole team of people that work on it. So they have, like, I typically have one contact in each of those. In Fayette County, it's the dose, but I think they probably hand it off to somebody else. In Jefferson County, it's not the dose. It's an Infinite Campus person who does a lot of the training. I know, I mean, I have a list of doses and their assistants. So I've noticed that in some districts, I don't talk to the dose most of the time. I talk to an assistant or another person. Well, actually, I talk to the dose, but the people I get questions from are typically not the dose. So it does look different in every district. And in a small district, it might be the Infinite Campus person, right? Like the cases administrator. I've noticed that as well. Because a lot of the majority of this data is collected from Infinite Campus. So it's just a report that I run, but somebody has to be comfortable in going in and updating, making sure the reports are accurate and making sure all kids are where they're supposed to be and that sort of thing. So it really does look different in every district. That's a good question. And I mean, I really think it's up to the dose, right? If you feel like you want somebody to hand it off to, then you can appoint that person.
Sure. I'll share a couple things for everybody to think about. Number one is if you come into a new position as a dose, oftentimes the previous dose is around to kind of help out or answer questions, especially if they're like retiring. I've seen that on many occasions to say, walk you through some of the processes. Here's how I did it. You might want to make changes, etc. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, if that dose left, quickly and has gone out of state or non-communicado, whatever, then, you've got to sort a lot of that out yourself. And, Amy's a good resource, but your special ed co-op is a huge one. And we've talked about mentoring and trying to find mentors. That's where this really comes in, to reach out to other doses within your special ed co-op. Your special ed co-op is going to have a director who can give you insight, but they'll also connect you into other doses around the region. That was a big help to me when I first got in the business. There were a couple that really helped me out. I reached out to, scheduled meetings with, and they talked me through a lot of the nuances of these kind of things. Thanks.
I want to note, Amy, that one of the slides that you showed earlier where it was talking about the data and the arrows off to the side, I like the fact that you brought it to the individual data entry, if you will, the ARC, because that's where the data is actually being captured for the very first time. It's very important that we capture that data correctly, because you don't get a second chance really unless you find out later that there's an error. So I think trainings with the staff that you may have once you become directors of special education, or as you go back to your district as a teacher, if you're responsible for entering any of this information into Infinite Campus, it's always great to know what the process is there locally, what you're supposed to do, how it's supposed to be done, because that's what creates these data. That's where change is based upon. We like to say that we are driven by database decision making, and for the most part we are. It directs how we spend funds. It often directs how funds are given to the districts, especially when we talk about state funding. So it's very critical. So I like how you took that back to the ARC level in looking at data, because that's where it all begins. So if you get off on the wrong road early, you may stay on the wrong road.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I was going to say that too. Thank you for reminding me. Things like we talked about removals and how those are sometimes the dose has accountability, but not necessarily any say in what happens. But especially for students with behavioral issues, I really think it's important to look at those in the ARC. Look at each item where the student was being removed. And is there something you could have done to prevent that? Not what are we going to do with him because he's out of school, you know, he's getting in trouble all the time, but let's take a look at patterns. Are there things we can look at and sort of maybe predict, see as tells? Is it happening every Monday because he had a chaotic weekend? Is it, you know, those sorts of things, and put provisions in place to help him. So it is important to take a look at individual data, you know, at the student level in the ARC, where there are a group of people that care about that student and can really sort of help him be successful.
I have a question about removals. Are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Harper Rowlett, Scott County. For removals in the data, Ms. Patterson, related to removals, in conversations with other folks from KDE, my understanding is the data that is used for that is any event that results in a removal that is greater than half a day. Is that accurate, or is it just any removal resulting in any amount of time from the classroom when you run the Safe Schools report? Thank you.
Anything that has been removed half a day, we look at every single removal for that student. It's not the event, it is the removal.
And
but the student had to have been removed half a day or more.
Well, the cumulative amount of time has to equal half a day.
Yes, thank you, Chris. I'm sorry.
We count every one of those shorter removals as well, but when we add them up, if it's less than 3 hours over the course of the school year, then that child's data won't be included in our special education disciplinary reports on removals. I can't speak to how Safe Schools might use theirs, but it comes from capturing all those individual events, removal events. Someone wants to go back to the disability category slide.
Move things around, sorry. Disability categories? I didn't have disability. Oh, you mean the data?
Your numbers, yeah, your data.
The child count.
That one? I love this slide.
You know, what's interesting is back in the early 2000s, we got up to about 108, 109,000 as a total child count. And for whatever reason, it started going down. And I think one of the reasons that it started going down was the requirement for doing what's it called, RTI types of activity interventions and documenting those before going through the identification process and determining a child eligible. So we dropped about 12,000 kids from our high, and now it looks like we had got back close to it in December of 2019 prior to the pandemic. I always thought that was very interesting, the impact that that one decision or that one regulation had on the numbers of kids that are receiving special education related services. Nicole?
So this is a question I'm just going to pose to the state. So I was the autism specialist for Jefferson County Public Schools for many years before I moved to Boone County. And now I am the autism and behavior coordinator for Boone County Schools. And my question is for the state people, and this isn't something you guys have to answer now or just for the whole group. I wonder when we look at these autism numbers of almost double our EBD numbers, And we know that, autism being a social and communication disorder, what I have seen in both districts is that a lot of our students with suspensions, it's actually our students in this autism category that are out of school a lot because of these behaviors. It's kind of shifted from our EBD students to this because we've hit so hard on suspension and disproportionality of EBD with suspensions that now we're seeing this group of autism students with these high suspension rates and behaviors. I don't know, have you guys like looked at that, or have you guys got any info? I mean, I think it's a fairly new phenomenal that we're seeing, but it's just interesting to me working in two large districts how this has become a pretty large problem, I think.
That is very interesting, Nicole. I think I'm going to make a note to take a look at that. And I had kind of noticed it incidentally, but we haven't looked at it. But that is interesting.
Well, and we're getting a lot of students too, I think, and this is something for the state to be aware of, that I think would have gotten an EBD diagnosis, but now they're getting these autism diagnoses because of that social piece being there, but the communication piece, when we look at pragmatic language, isn't always there. And, right or wrong, I know providers sometimes are the ones that we get these outside agency reports that come into us and we look at everything. But then I'm seeing a lot of my kids with autism are becoming, are more quickly suspended. And so when we look at this gap, I don't know, I think this is a new gap that we might be seeing and trending.
Nicole, in absence of any long-term study as to why that's occurring, and it is interesting, as you noted, to look at, one can speculate on some reasons for that. And, the perception of a child being labeled with EBD versus autism might differ. So there might be some impact there. Yet we have identified districts with significant disproportionality in EBD. And so there might be some impact as a result of that. Autism is also an area that is looked at for significant disproportionality and disproportionate representation in indicator 10. So it's a potential, but it's more balanced if you look at the race ethnicity data for autism than it has been for EBD. So there might be a trend based upon that kind of disproportionality by race in moving and identifying kids under autism that might have previously been identified under EBD, plus the issue that you gave there with that social piece that may make it a little more difficult. But all that's just speculation because there isn't any long-term studies that I'm aware, at least not of Kentucky's data. It might be a good doctoral study for someone to pick up on.
It's a great conversation. Are there any other thoughts or questions?
It's also interesting to note that the category of autism and traumatic brain injury, I think, were first introduced in like 1992, whereas many of the others were around for quite some time. And seeing the growth in autism and pretty much, the flatline numbers for traumatic brain injury. And I think that can be medically, there's an event that occurred for traumatic brain injury, whereas autism is a little different in that kind of diagnosis. But there is, going back to the EBD versus autism, when we look at funding from the state, those two categories are funded at the same level. So there's no impact to the district financially on whether the child is identified in one of those categories or the other. The impact that might occur with what are the certifications of the teachers, the special education teachers at the local level, to be able to provide services to that population of students. And that's outside of my realm of expertise, but that might be something that has an impact as well.
And Amy, I dropped in the into the chat, since we're talking about some of these trends and data, a link to the special education data dashboard. Do you want to take just about 60 seconds and just kind of like give a high level overview of the data dashboard?
Sure. Give me a second. I'll open it. Maybe. So we actually have two dashboards. We have one that is child count data that is supposed to be updated any day now. So this is just sort of a statewide view. And so you can mouse over and see, you know, which districts. It's color coded. So the darker the color, the more dense the special education population is. So there's like Kentucky School for the Deaf, and that's 100%, which we would expect. And then you have some that are, you know, oh, that's Fort Knox. And that's Fort Campbell. I was looking for another yellow one here. Fort Thomas is 7.52%. So you can mouse over that and just sort of look at it. You can also only just look at district, but that's not all that helpful. And then we have it by co-op as well. And then down here, and the most recent data we have is 2021. We lost our developer, our programmer, and so we're waiting. We're trying to hire another one, but so we'll be able to get the more recent 2021 data and also 22 data, because we're getting ready to collect that soon. But this breaks it down by race, by gender, and by the way, the most consistent statistic in special education is male versus female. Male is almost always 2/3. Female is almost always 1/3 across the board. And then it breaks it down by disability. Now, there's a lot of redaction when you get down to individual districts by redaction. I mean, if there are less than 10 students, we can't report that data. And if there's only one, for example, down here, if there's only one disability that has fewer than 10 students, then we have to redact another one as well. So you can't do the math and figure out who those students are. But you can break this down by state, early childhood regional training center, school district, or co-op or CERTAC.
Yeah, we might need to update that language from co-op to CERTAC.
Yes, we will. But again, gotta wait for our programmer.
Yep.
And then there's a comparison tool. So for example, I could compare 2020-21 for the state to 2018-19 for the state and see how they compare. They're pretty consistent. So you can break it down by race, gender, placement, grade band being preschool versus K through 14. So yeah. So there's that dashboard, and then we have another one that shows the indicators. And this one, we're still, again, we lost our programmer. Not to use that as an excuse, but that's my excuse. That allows you to look at the indicators. So if I'm looking at, for example, indicator 5A. So 5A is the percent of students in the district who are in the general ed classroom greater than 80% of the day. And so this is similar to that other state map that we had, where you can look at it by district. So you can mouse over and see. And then down here, it'll show you each district and what the percentage is. And if it says data not available, well, Fort Campbell and Fort Knox are not part of Kentucky schools. Yeah, so if it's less than, or if it says data not available, either most of these districts are not, don't exist anymore. But like Raceland, Worthington, they probably just had fewer than 10 students. It had to be redacted. So there you go.
Thank you very much. And just looking at time, so it is almost 11:05. So why don't we go ahead and pause, take a break. We'll do a break from 11:05 to 11:10. And then when we get back at 11:10, you guys will get to hear from Chris, who has all of the historical knowledge about KDE in the history, I think. He is our history, KDE history textbook. So
That's a
I
polite
will.
way of calling an old man. I get it.
But we will come back at 11:10, friends. And Chris, you'll have to about 11:35, but if you need a few more minutes, we can, just do like 10 minutes in the breakout rooms versus 15. So,
Is it sharing my screen yet?
Mhm.
Okay.
Do you want me to give you a timestamp, or are you pretty good about keeping up with your own time?
What time am I supposed to quit?
So we have scheduled small groups at 11:35 that would give them 15 minutes. But like I said, if you want to shave, if you need like an additional 5 extra minutes, we could do like 11:40.
All right.
So like no later than 11:40.
Yeah, timestamp is fine.
Okay, perfect.
And Chris, it's showing in the presenter mode, so it shows your next slide as well. I don't know that that's an issue, but just to know that's what's presenting. If that makes sense, right? You have
Yeah, I
your
know what you're
slide.
talking about.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
let me see, share it again. Let's see what it gives me here.
You may have to adjust your display settings.
Yeah,
What you
that's
should.
assuming I know how to do that.
I always have to I do this all the time, and I'm like, wait, which button is it I need to hit, and which one is
There
it
it
that I
is.
like?
Yeah.
Is it right now? Did you say, Bill?
Yes. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
it's just slide.
All right, everybody. It is 11:10 by my clock, so we will go ahead and hop back into the presentation and get started. Chris, are you feeling ready to go?
I am as ready as ever, I guess.
All right.
As you've heard my name mentioned here several times, of course, my name is Chris Thacker, and I have been around, as Shasta so politely noted, and have experience. So I'm going to talk about money matters in special education, and I hope you caught the double reference in money matters. We'll talk about the matters of money and the fact that money does in fact matter. So let's see if I can get this screen to advance the way I intended for it to. I stole this from Amy. I thought that she did a very good job with that. I kind of like it. This is me, and I do those special education fiscal requirements, and I work with fiscal issues all over the state. And why does Chris care about special education fiscal issues? Well, let's go a little bit further here. This is still you, and you still work with students with disabilities. And this is why you should care about special education fiscal issues too, because like it or not, money impacts what we can do, what we do, what we're able to do. And, so we've got to make sure that we are acquiring as much funding as we can possibly, and that we are using it judiciously, and that we are using it appropriately as well. And we'll try to go into a little bit of all of that in the course of this discussion. So how is special education funded in Kentucky? Well, the big elephant in the room is the state exceptional child add-on funds. That is the biggest piece of the money that we get. There's the local tax revenue that you get, and there is federal funds under both IDA Section 611. Sometimes you'll hear in Kentucky it referred to as basic IDA funds. That's a Kentucky term only. I coined that years ago just to differentiate it between 611 and 619, just because it was an easy way to make that terminology work for us. 619 is the preschool that came along a little bit later than the initial IDA funds. So what were the actual expenses? And this is from the year 2020-21. LEAs reported spending $450,003,832 state dollars in munis on special education. That's a pretty good chunk of funding. And that's just for special education of students. It's not for the general education that special education students also receive. And that doesn't include what's being spent at KSB and KSD. That's just in local districts. Local expenditures reported were $169,265,310. So you can see that's quite a bit of funds as well. When I look at the federal coming up next, it isn't the expenditures that I report here, but it's the amount that was allocated or received by LEAs for the 2020-21 year. And the reason I did that is because each year you get an allocation, and so ultimately you're going to be spending all of that unless you return some of it. But it was easier just to give the allocations. So when we look at the federal 611 and 619, you got for school age $153,249,620. And you got for preschool $7,801,653 for a total of $161,051,273 federal dollars for special education. As you can see, it's the lesser of all three of the fund amounts that you have there. There is a caveat for the 2020-21 school year. There was a piece of legislation passed called the American Recovery Plan. And that plan awarded an additional around $43 million through Section 611 and Section 619. But that's abnormal. That's an anomaly. It doesn't usually happen that way. So I decided to leave it off here for this 2020-21 year, just so you can get a handle on where your money is coming from and how it occurs. When we talk about the federal funds for under the IDA, those funds are earmarked, and that means that they must be spent specifically for special education. And the way the terminology is in the IDA itself is These funds are to be spent on the excess costs of providing special education and related services. People often gloss over that excess cost piece, but we'll discuss that here in a little bit. And the reason I'm making sure that you know that these are earmarked funds, that they have to be spent on special education, the SEEK dollars do not. Now, what I'm showing you here is what was actually spent for special education. But when you get that SEEK Exceptional Child Add-on, it's kind of an allocation as this is how much money you're going to get based upon your special education population. It goes right into your district's general fund. It doesn't have to be spent on special education from the state's perspective. But there's another thing, another terminology we're going to look at here in a little bit called maintenance of effort, which is under the IDA that requires you to continue to spend some state and local funds. Another little nuanced thing here, we talked about the general fund. Both state and local funds go into the general fund that is tracked through Munis. We don't disaggregate, if you will, what was a local expenditure or what was a state expenditure. It was just a Fund 1 expenditure. So you may be asking, well, how do I know then that we spent $169,265,310 of local funds? We do that by process of elimination. We know for each and every individual school district how much SEEK Exceptional Child Add-on funds they received that year. And when an LEA spent more than the amount of state funds it got under the SEEK Exceptional Child Add-on Fund for special education, we consider that excess above that to be spending your local tax revenue. Now, the reality of it is we're not tracking dollars one way or the other, but to meet maintenance of effort requirements under the IDEA, states have to allow local districts to look at their local expenditures only. And we worked with people in a national TA center called CIFER, the Center for IDA Fiscal Reporting, about how we could do that since we don't track local expenditures separately. And that was kind of the methodology that we came up with to be able to identify some local expenditures. And you can see it's quite a bit. And the reality is you are spending that much more over the amount of state funds that you actually received for special education. Not every district does that. Some districts will spend less than their SEEK Exceptional Child Add-on funds. And in those cases, those districts do not have, we do not report them as having spent any local funds in providing special education and related services. So we talked quite a bit about your Exceptional Child Add-on. How do you arrive at the amount of Exceptional Child Add-on funds that you're going to get from a given year? Well, it's part of the SEEK funding formula. That's what's called the SEEK Exceptional Child Add-on. And SEEK has traditionally been funded based on the prior year's membership or attendance and things like that. So with regards to the Exceptional Child Add-on, it also looks at the prior year data. And the prior year data that it looks at is that December 1 child count that Amy talked about in great detail previously. But it only includes, if you'll notice on this screen, ages 5 through 20 on item number 3. That's because for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, those are always preschool kids. And for 21-year-olds, they will be gone the next year, so they wouldn't be around. So we've got only ages 5 through 20, and that's what the way the statute is set up with the state regulations for making that calculation. So when we go back to that child count, there are 3 different weighted values depending upon the disability that was reported. So we will have to sort all of those different disability counts by the weighted values. Then we will calculate the total counts for each of those 3 categories. One of the categories or weighted values is speech only. So that's a pretty easy one. Whatever your speech count is for ages 5 through 20. The other 2 are comprised by multiple different disabilities. And we'll get into that in just a little bit here. Once we get those 3 categories in step 4, we go to step 5 as we multiply each of the total counts in step 4 separately by its assigned weight to get the weighted count for each category. So for example, the speech category has a weight of 0.24. If there were 100 speech kids in your district, the weight is 0.24. You multiply that times 100, you get 24. So that becomes the weighted count for the speech category. And we do that then, that same process for all of the other different categories. And then we add all those three subtotals together in step 6, and then multiply that sum times the guaranteed base amount from step 1. Each year, when the SEEK funding formula was first set up, the General Assembly established in the budget bill what that guaranteed base amount per child will be. I'm not sure if they still do that or if there's some negotiation back and forth between the department, our Office of Finance, and the Legislative Research Commission, or how that comes about. But they do come up with a guaranteed base amount that gets multiplied by that total that you have in line 6. And once you multiply that total there in number 7, that is the amount of exceptional child add-on funds that the LEA is going to receive. So that's your state SEEK funding. Of course, we also talked about federal funding, and it's a little more complicated even than that one, maybe. Well, depending on your perspective. As Shasta mentioned, I bring the historical perspective, and it was in the 1997 amendments to the IDEA that they changed the funding allocation process for LEAs from just being whatever their child count is multiplied by a specific dollar amount each year. They did away with child count being involved at all, really, in the future allocations that an LEA will get. But thinking that the child count had some basis for them to start with, they did set up a base funding amount for every LEA. Well, the state was supposed to do that based upon child count back in the late 1990s. So every LEA across the state has a base amount for both Section 611 and Section 619. 619, obviously, the base amount is much, much less because you saw a while ago the amount of funds for 619 is considerably less. So that base allocation was established at the turn of the century, and here we are in 2022, and it's still the same for every district, unless a independent school district consolidated with the county district, then those two base amounts were merged together. As we approach having charter schools in Kentucky, there might be some impact on base allocations because of those charter schools. We have yet to figure out how that's going to work out because we don't know exactly how charter schools are going to pop up and how they're going to be considered with regards to that funding. There's different things that can occur there. But generally speaking, the base allocations were set back prior to 2000, and they're still out there, and every district starts out with that amount each year. They get additional funding based upon the enrollment of all students, K through 12, whether they're a kid with a disability or not a disability, doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter whether it's a kid enrolled in your school district or in a private parochial or home school located within your school district. We look at all of those kids. The DPP at local districts is supposed to keep up with all of those private parochial and home schools and how many students are involved so that we get that. And we gather that from the Declaration of Participation report that's captured out of another office at KDE. Then we look at the total number of students who are eligible for a free or reduced meal. We have to get these counts individually for each LEA. It's the free and reduced meal one has been a little bit problematic of late because of the community funding for free and reduced meal that allows for every kid in a district in some cases to get free lunch or free breakfast. But they still have to go through the process, even those districts, of identifying who the eligible students are so that there is an actual count. And we get that from the School of Food and Community Nutrition folks at KDE as well. So then once we get those figures, we have to know what is the amount per child for those students that are enrolled in step 4, and what is the amount per child for those students who are eligible for a free or reduced meal in step 3. And we multiply those two to each of those and get a total for each LEA for each of those. So we add all of those steps together in 1, 4, and 5, your base, your enrollment and your free and reduced meal, and that's how you get your allocation, whether it's for Section 611 or 619. We use the actual numbers for both 611 and 619 as far as the counts are concerned. We're counting elementary and secondary kids in both. We're counting free and reduced meal kids that are eligible in both, regardless of age. The amount per child for 611 and 619 will vary greatly just because of the actual amount of allocation that the state receives under those two programs. So that's how you get your money. Here is a table, and this is going to be an activity. I want each of you to pick an individual LEA and try to calculate how much of first the Seek Exceptional Child add-on it's going to get. And secondly, if we have time, we'll see if we can figure out the IDA allocations for a particular year based on the information that you have in front of you. Let's see, do I have enough information here? It looks like something might be missing. Oops. Here is a shot at the first one. I thought that it'd be good to give you an example. The weighted count, which was speech only, it ended up being 2.89. And that's because if you go back and look, their child count was 12. So you multiply 12 by 2.24 and you get 2.88. For developmentally delayed, we got 5. For mild mental, we got 12. For specific learning disability, we got 9. For orthopedically impaired, we got 3. And for other health impaired, we got 7. The weight for this category is 1.17. So we have to add all 3 of those numbers together, multiply it by 1.17, and we get 42.12. Then we do the same thing for all the other disability categories. And you'll recall in our earlier discussion, I said autism and EBD, emotional behavior disability, have the same weight, which is 2.65. And actually that's wrong, it's 2.35. I don't know why I put 2.65. So we need to change that to 2.35, which means that the answer that's going to be given on here is going to be based on it being 2.65, but that is an error. Don't know what I was thinking when I did that. Just now saw that. If I go to this one, that's what that count would be if it were 2.65. We add all 3 of those together and we get our total weighted count, which is 105.95. If you'll recall, I said you were to multiply that amount, which is the total weighted count, by the guaranteed base. And the guaranteed base amount per child for this is $4,000. And I used that, 1, because it's a real easy number to round, and 2, because it was $4,000 for about 3 or 4 school years. So that was out there as a real figure for quite a while. So when I multiply that times $4,000, this becomes the total exceptional child add-on funds for that LEA. The next 2 figures here, and this is what I left off on your information. For this column here, the base allocation is $60,676.69. That was that figure that was created back in at the turn of the century. Makes it sound a whole lot longer ago when I say turn of the century. Then we've got for the preschool program, the base allocation, see, it's much less, $11,653. So we got to then add to that the amount for students who are enrolled and the count of free and reduced kids. So these are the 2 counts. This is the amount for enrollment based on $122 per child for 327 kids. It's only 50 cents per child for preschool because it's such a smaller amount of funds available. So 50 cents times $171 is $85.50. And then we have to multiply this amount here for free and reduced meal count. Where is your free and reduced meal? Right here it is. Let's see, did I get that right? Yeah. So I multiply these same two numbers by these variables to come up with the amount for the free and reduced. So to get my section 611 allocation, I start with the base, add to it the count for all students enrolled, and add to it the count for free and reduced meal, and I get that as the allocation. For the preschool, I start with its base, add the amount for enrollment, and add the amount for free and reduced meal. And look, it's only 20 cents per child, and that is their allocation. That's how it occurs. And unfortunately, since I made the mistake in the diagram of not giving you the base allocations here, you can't do the IDA part, but you can do, using this information, you can do the Seek Exceptional Child add-on. I can't see the chat, so are there any questions out there right now?
Yeah, we had one question, so I think kind of earlier on, and it said, in most districts, does the finance department oversee the maintenance of effort?
That's a good question, and how it operates at the local level is obviously at the discretion of the superintendent and the people there as to who's going to be responsible for it. As a director of special education, whether you're ultimately the one that does it or not, you need to keep up with it and be aware of it, because it's critical to your ability to be able to perform and know what resources that you have available to you to be able to carry out that job. If you don't know from year to year how much money that you have or how much money you've spent out of state and local resources, then it's going to be a surprise to you if you've come up and find out that, uh-oh, we didn't meet the maintenance of effort requirement. So that is a great question and a critical piece. I'm looking at my time, so I better move on a little bit, but this can be a practice for you. Loaded into the actual SharePoint, Becca's going to put in the answers to this so that you'll be able to see it. We won't have time, obviously, to go through it and calculate those. But that is the process, and you will have this available to you to be able to figure it out. We do that at the state every year for all 170 plus LEAs for both the base allocations and for the basic allocation under section 611 and the preschool section for 619. We send the information to the finance people at OFO at KDE, Office of Financial Finance, and I forget what the other O stands for, to do the Seek Exceptional Child add-on. We know what the formula is and we can figure it out, but there sometimes little nuances occur with what that guaranteed base actually ends up being, so we can't be as precise as they are on it. I want to go here and I show you, I did the answers for each one of them, and please remember that when looking at this here that I used the wrong weight for the low incidence population at autism and functional mental disability and EBD and HI and VI and multiple disabilities and traumatic brain injury. It should be 2.35 and I used 2.65. So my apologies for getting that wrong, but the math works. The steps are correct and appropriate. And these are the answers that you have for each of those. And now when you look at this key, you see that you have the base allocations for each of these districts. And I just made these up, so they're not real world circumstances necessarily, so it may not jive, it may not make sense when you look at their allocations, but it's just to be able to give you an exercise in where the numbers come from and how we decide or calculate the allocations each year for local districts. We talked about that maintenance of financial, well, actually we talked about maintenance of effort, which is the fourth bullet down, but there's another bullet that comes into play before that. It's called the state maintenance of financial support. And to receive IDA funds, the state has to make sure that it's continuing to make funds available at the same level it has in previous years to be able to get these funds. If the state doesn't make that much funds available, then we get a cut in the IDA allocations that we get from OSEP each year. Once you get money, what's an allowable cost? Well, essentially, when I said earlier, you can spend your IDA funds on the excess cost of providing special education and related services. An allowable cost is simply something that is special education specific to the child. You can't pay for their regular education programs. You can't pay for the regular education activities that they're involved with that every other student is involved with. But if there is a cost related to that child's disability under the IDA, then most likely, unless it's an unusual circumstance, it's going to be allowable. But it has to be the excess cost. So what is excess cost? There is a formula in Appendix A of the federal regulations at 34 CFR 300 that gives the process for determining what excess cost is. Essentially, excess cost says that the district has to spend separately for elementary kids and separately for secondary kids an amount that's the same whether I'm a kid with a disability or a general education kid. So if there's an annual average per pupil expenditure on an elementary kid in your district of $5,000 of state funds or the general fund, and there's a $6,500 annual average cost for a secondary kid, then I've got to spend that much money providing general education and education in general, even special education is included in that for a kid with a disability. So once you hit that threshold of that average per pupil, then everything above that is an excess cost. Everything that you have to spend beyond that average amount to provide special education is an excess cost. So one of the reasons we like for districts to continue to spend state money on providing special education teachers is that's spending state money in providing education to a child with a disability. So that helps to meet that excess cost piece, which is different than the next item, which is maintenance of effort. And essentially, maintenance of effort requires you to spend as much either state and local funds combined or local funds only in providing special education to students with disabilities. A little bit different than the excess costs, because this looks only at the special education costs that are occurring. How much did I pay that special education teacher out of state and local funds? How much did I spend on transportation out of state and local funds? What are the costs that I incurred out of my general fund in providing special education to those students? And then the next year I have to spend at least that much again. There are 4 tests: state and local funds in total, local funds only in total. And remember, the local funds was just the whatever you spent that was in excess of your exceptional child add-on funds under the SEEK program. Then we look at the per pupil expenditure of each of those. So those are 4 tests. You only have to pass one of the 4 tests to meet maintenance of effort requirements. So it's very difficult perhaps to do, but you've got 4 different shots at it. And then if you don't make it, there's some other exceptions that come into play that might allow you to reduce what that threshold is to spending these funds. So there's a very good opportunity there. We have a guy named Jonathan Compton that works out of OSIL, the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, who works with local districts around this issue and this issue alone. Note that we have MOE eligibility and MOE compliance. Eligibility is that you budget at least as much as you did in prior years. MOE compliance is that you actually spent that. Never budget to fail. Budget is just what it is. You budget to spend as much as you need to spend. Now, you may not end up spending it, but let that get hit when we look at compliance as opposed to not making eligibility. If you don't pass the eligibility piece, in theory, you don't get the IDA funds at all. If you fail to comply, you just have to pay the amount out of state and local funds that you failed to comply by. So you still get the money. So that's by far the better way to go with that one. There's something also called private school proportionate amount out of your IDA funds. What that simply means is if out of your IDA allocations that you get each year, you've got to look at, are there private school kids out there in private parochial or homeschool programs in elementary and secondary schools? If they are and they have disabilities, then we've got to set aside a proportionate amount of our allocations to provide services to them. It's maybe a different services, because when they're going to a private, parochial, or a homeschool, they may not have an IEP. They may have what's called a services plan, and the services plan may not provide the full range of FAPE, and it doesn't have to. Full range of FAPE is an IEP for those students who come to your district. Services plans are equitable services you're going to provide to a child with a disability that's attending that private, parochial, or homeschool. Significant disproportionality. We talked about that a little with the data that Amy talked about. We also talked about disproportionate representation and significant disproportionate or significant something to do with this one. I forget the word for it right now. Significant discrepancy, I think, may be it. But significant disproportionality is the one that, if you have that in your data, requires you to pull 15% of your IDA allocations, set it aside to implement something called Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services. And about 12 to 15 or so districts each year have to do that. That's not providing special education. That's working with whatever the root cause was for the reason that you have that disproportionality, so that you won't be disproportionate in the future. Districts may also choose to voluntarily pull back 15% of their money or less. They can do less. If they have significant disproportionality, it's 15%, no exceptions. If you're doing it voluntarily, it's a little bit different program. It's only to provide interventions, academic behavior interventions to students, to work with them to help things out in your identification process, perhaps. They're related, but they're not the same. So just keep that in mind. I think, Shasta, I've probably hit my time limit. What do you want me to do at this point?
Yeah, so camera. So really just kind of, looking at, I know you have some other things and thinking about what our scholars might need. Is there any other like really important things you want to take some time to go over? Because we can always just switch and do like a whole group discussion today versus breakout room. So if there's something that you really want to share that you think is important to them, I think that would be very valuable.
Well, one of the questions we often get is, can I spend my money doing this? Can I spend my money doing this? It's impossible to come up with an exhaustive list of everything that you can't spend it on. But here is a list of kind of general areas. Attorney fees aren't an allowable expenditure. When I talk about attorney fees, I'm not talking about I've got an attorney who does training for us around procedural safeguards. That's legit. You can do that. I'm talking about an attorney fee that defends you in trial in a due process hearing, or things, that type of attorney fee. Bad debt, surely that wouldn't even be an imagination. Contingencies, in other words, you can't take money out of your IDA program and put it into just a rainy day fund over to the side somewhere. That's not allowed. You can't make contributions or donations. You can't pay for daycare. You can't pay for entertainment expenditures. You can't pay for fines or penalties or damages or settlements if you lose a case. You can't pay interest or on loans or financial costs. Can't use the money to lobby either the state General Assembly or the U.S. Congress about laws or regulations. It can't be for memberships in civic, community, and social organizations that are engaged in lobbying activities. Can't pay for pre-service. In other words, I can't pay to give Johnny a scholarship out of my IDA allocations to go get certified in special education. Now, there's some nuances there, but in general, as an LEA, you can't do that. Can't pay for real property. In other words, you can't buy land. You can't buy buildings. Religion can't be used for religious activities. So those are just kind of broad categories that you can't. And a while ago, I talked about what can you spend it on. And this is kind of a general, very general list of things. You can spend it on personnel to provide special education related services. You can spend it on contract services to provide those the OT, PT, and things of that nature. You can pay for your administrative staff to do things, because that's part of the personnel that have responsibilities that are specific to the program. They may not be teaching kids or working directly with kids, but they're doing support for the program. Obviously, you can buy supplies and materials that are needed to implement those IEPs. You can purchase equipment needed to implement an IEP, but you have to get prior approval for each piece of equipment. And equipment is defined as any item that costs $5,000 or more, or has a useful life of greater than 1 year. That useful life thing is you also have to think about in terms of equipment, because you might buy supplies and materials that can sit on the shelf for multiple years. We're not talking about that. We're talking about equipment types of things that may be cheaper than $1,000 or $5,000, but we know it's going to last. A computer that you have, that computer may not cost $5,000, but I might use it for four or 5 years. So I might have to get a prior approval to do that. So those are the types of things that we're looking at with regards to spending your funds. You will have access to this PowerPoint, and I tried to define some of these terms here for you as it goes through, so at least you have that available for you. Any other questions at this point?
So Martha asked, why would a district do this voluntarily? And I think that she's talking about the 15% with CCEIS. Is that correct, Martha?
Well, that's a good question. And the answer to that is very few do. It has happened on occasion. And we even had some districts that were doing significant disproportionality and implementing comprehensive coordinated early intervening services for 2 or 3 years. And they liked the program so much that they thought it'd be a great idea to continue it. And they could, to some degree, with these funds. When I say to some degree, there's some differences in what you can do voluntarily versus what you can do with significant disproportionality. With significant disproportionality, it can run from ages 3 through 21 that are going to, for students that are going to receive benefit. It can be special education students or non-special education students. For voluntary CEIS, it's only for grades K through 12, should be emphasizing grades K through 3. It's only for behavioral interventions that are or academic interventions, those types of things. Whereas significant disproportionality, you have to do an analysis, root cause analysis as to why do you have significant disproportionality, and spend your money addressing those concerns. So there's some things in there that might make you want to do it, but largely it's very rarely done. Great question though.
And so just kind of thinking about time, I know that we don't have, a ton of time to spend, into small groups. It takes like 2 minutes to get over there. So let's just kind of do like a whole group, kind of reflection, thinking about the information that both Amy and Chris have shared for us. So just take a moment to pause, and then if somebody could just kind of share out maybe one of their responses or reactions to one of these questions.
So I think I'm going to make a post on a discussion board because I like budgeting. I know that's kind of odd, and I've never done it on a scale as large as a DOS budget, or school budget. But I mean, I know you have to have your set budget before, and the state has to approve it and all those things. But as a DOS, do you plan for changes that are inevitably going to happen with your budget?
That's an excellent question. One of the things you might look at is historically, what are some of the things that have occurred that you spent money on? Transportation, for example, is a good thing, because some years you might have to pay transportation that's more significant than others based upon the related services needs of a child with a disability. And we might need to spend either from our SEEK Exceptional Child Add-on funds, or decide that, well, I'm going to spend it out of my IDA funds. For the 2021 school year, where you had all those ARP IDA funds, you may have identified a lot of extra things that we could spend money on that is a one-time only type of shot. But you really have to live within the constraints of what your allocation is going to be, and then do some type of program analysis as to what do I have to have? Well, I have to have special education teachers. So that's a given. I have to have paraprofessionals. That's a given. I have to have me as the director of the program and some support for that. So there's some given expenditures that are always going to be there. So what are the possible outliers of things that I couldn't see happen? We can't put money away in a contingency, but we might over budget for some supplies and materials, realizing we may not spend the 15,000 that we've got budgeted there. We may only spend 10. So that gives me a $5,000 cushion in case something happens. So you just have to be constantly on top of it, see what's coming down the road as far as potential expenditures, make plans, to be able to readjust and allocate. Know your budget inside and out, so you know where the fat is and where the lean is, where you can cut, where you can't cut, to be able to redistribute those funds. Oftentimes at a moment's notice. An emergency came up today. Our special education class had a fire in it, and we lost some of the equipment that we use in there. I've got to replace that. How am I going to replace it? Did the insurance cover it? If so, great. If not, I might have to buy a couple of computers for the teacher and the paraprofessional. I might have to buy some devices for the children that are in that classroom that they use it to implement their IEP. Might have to buy a lot of supplies and materials. So there's no real easy answer to it. Just like your home budget, you never know when an emergency is going to come up. You just got to have maybe a little built-in cushion to take care of it. Mike?
Yeah, I just follow up with you, Chris. This is a really important and worthy question. As a new director, that's one of the first things you want to talk about with your assistant superintendent. You want to ask, first off, you want to look at your last year's budget, because that's going to guide you on where you're at with the current budget, et cetera. Where did you have a lot of over expenditures, under expenditures, et cetera? And if you're considering a job at a local district and you're in the interview process, that's one of the questions I would also ask the interview committee. What was the budget like? What was the amount of the budget? Was there overages in the budget? Were there problems with the budget? Did the special ed department have to go and ask the superintendent to cover extra expenses that weren't covered in the budget? So these are operating things that are really important. But going into the role your first year, first thing to ask about, were there budget problems? What were those problems? Can I take a look? You want to take a look at last year's budget as a guide, and you'll analyze that budget to see overages and under expenditures too. So I just want to throw that in just from a practical standpoint once you get out into the field.
And one of the early questions asked about, should the finance person do the MOE or should it be the director of special education? There's a lot to unpack there. As the director of special education, if it were me, I would want to have as much control over it as possible. It's nice to have the support and get the finance people to be able to make sure that people get paid and things occur as they're supposed to. But I want to know how much SEEK Exceptional Child Add-on funds are coming into my district that were generated by my students, that we receive this money to provide special education, so I have access to that budget. Now, the downside of that might be that isn't enough money to live on. And as you saw from my display a while ago, we have nearly $170 million from local revenue that's going into it. So there's going to be expenditures that occur providing special education that are beyond what you receive in state exceptional child add-on and what you receive in your IDA funds as well. But keep in mind, students with disabilities, even those in self-contained or separate classes, are general education students. They generate the SEEK base formula. They generate that 4,000 guaranteed base amount or whatever that is for the year. And they generate whatever other add-ons that they may be a part of. Now, they may be generating it for something other than special education, but if I'm in a self-contained class all day, then shouldn't I get some of that regular education money that they're generating to operate that program as well? So those are the kind of arguments that you might make. But keep in mind, the yin and yang of that. If you want to take it over, they may say, well, okay, you take over it, but this is all you're getting. So, it's a negotiation.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up quickly. Chris raises great points. In a small district, You always want to be involved in the budget cycle. I would never turn that over and have someone create the budget, another assistant superintendent, and then say, here's your budget to deal with. You want to have communication so you know what's going on in there. In a smaller district, you're going to be leading that budget because you're not going to have, you're going to have a handful of people in the board office, and you'll probably be working with an accounting clerk to work to build that budget, make sure it, everything balances out right. But if you get, growing and growing, you get into like a multi-million-dollar budget, you're going to have a couple finance people working with you, and you're going to be giving feedback. It's going to be a team process, but
Absolutely.
yeah.
But even then, don't be left in the dark. Make sure that the finance people inform you of how the money's being spent and what it's being spent on.
Just great thoughts and feedback. Are there any other just kind of like questions, additional reactions? I saw some good information. Carmen had posted some things there. She said you can revise the budget based upon those needs, resubmit for approval, and then you're able to spend money on those needs as long as you don't go over the budget and if you don't get approved for that item code the first time. So again, just some good information there in the chat as well. Alrighty, I do want to keep us on track. So what I will say is if you have continued discussions, continued questions, use the discussion board to pose those questions, and I'll ask and I'll remind. And once I see some questions in there, or if I see some questions in there, I'll ask Amy or Chris to kind of hop in and maybe, provide some resources or some information. And of course, you guys can always reach out to Chris or Amy, either one, via email. And so their information is in the PowerPoint. So you can, if you have a very specific question, maybe specific to a district or situation, you're welcome to email them as well. Or even if it's just a general question, that's fine too. All righty. Well, with that, I think we're coming to, yes, we have about 4 minutes left. So we will drop the evaluation, your exit slip, so to speak. We will make sure that gets dropped. Oh, Bill's already on it. So please make sure that you fill that out. Again, that is, and we say this all the time, but we really do look at those and we make decisions based off of your feedback. So if you really like something, you want to keep doing it. If you have, good feedback for our presenters about what worked, please share that in there. If something didn't work, if you missed something, if something was unclear, or you have some suggestions on how we could improve your time with us on Saturday, please add that in there as well. Are there any final thoughts, questions, or comments before we leave? All righty. Well, if not, so our next Saturday session will actually be November 19th. Now, you guys know that we usually do it the fourth Saturday, but that will be like Thanksgiving weekend. And we know you guys are all like going to be like napping or shopping or doing something that Saturday. And that's so we will not have it the fourth Saturday next month. It will actually be the third Saturday, and that'll be November 19th. That'll be right before CEC. And so we hope to get to see some of you guys at CEC, which will be really exciting. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But just go ahead and make that note to yourself. If you need to, I know some of you set reminders like at the very beginning of the sessions, like for fourth Saturday. So go ahead and just make that change or make a note, however you need to do that. They will actually be on November 19th. And if there is nothing else, thank you all so much for sharing your time and your energy with us this morning. We hope everybody has a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Take
Bye,
care, everybody.
everyone.